My own son and his wife locked my sick wife and me in the basement of our old family estate. They screamed. "This house is ours now, sitting in that damp darkness," I whispered to Sarah. "Quiet. They do not know what is hiding behind that wall." When they finally left, I moved a loose brick and showed my wife the secret I had kept for 43 years. The truth about who I really am. A truth capable of destroying everything they think they know about our family. Before telling you what happened, like this video, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are listening to my story from. I want to know how far it has reached. I woke up at 5:30 in the morning, just like I have for 40 years. I didn't need a clock. My body knows what time it is. Outside, it was very quiet. I heard the bell ring downtown, and then the sound of pigeons on the roof. I opened the window. Fresh air came in, smelling like jasmine. The sky was getting bright, and the wind blew through the orange tree leaves. I heard a bicycle and the sound of the newspaper hitting the steps. It was the daily paper. I picked it up and put it on the old wooden table next to the teapot. I walked down the hall where the floor creaks. My wedding photo with Sarah was crooked on the wall. The gold frame wasn't shiny anymore. I fixed it gently and touched the glass. In the living room, I lit the oil lamp by the altar. I feel like the house is alive as long as that flame burns. Then I went to the kitchen. I heard the gas turn on and smelled the toast. This was my routine in the small world I control. I made breakfast for Sarah like I always do. Before serving it, I counted her pills carefully. I heard high heels walking upstairs. It was Linda. She usually wakes up late, but she walked fast today. Her strong perfume filled the house. I put the tray on the table and looked at the window. Sarah was awake in her chair with her shawl. She looked pale but calm in the morning light. She smiled a little when she saw me. "Good morning, my love," I said to her. I fed her some oatmeal and gave her some tea. She squeezed my hand, which meant a lot to me. I opened the door to let fresh air in. The room smelled like orange blossoms again. Then I heard a car. A gray Audi stopped at the gate. My son Daniel got out, talking loudly on his phone. He told someone to close a deal by Monday. He sounded bossy, just like always. I went to the porch. He hung up when he saw me. He waved at me and kissed his mother quickly. "Mom, you look better," he said without really looking. Linda came downstairs in a robe with her coffee. She looked impatient. "David," she called me by my first name, "the Wi-Fi is broken. Can you fix it?" I didn't answer. I just nodded. I put the tray down and went to fix the router. It was blinking slowly. While it restarted, I heard them laughing about a fancy dinner. I went back to the living room. Sarah was asleep. Linda had changed the tablecloth to a beige one. She said it looked more modern without looking at me. I just nodded and folded the old tablecloth. At noon, Daniel brought takeout food. He said I shouldn't cook so Mom could rest. I served the food but didn't eat. They talked about money and business while eating. The house sounded strange, like I didn't belong. After lunch, I washed the dishes quietly. The warm water felt familiar. In the afternoon, I went to the garden. The sun shone on the orange tree. I watered the plants and cut some roses for Sarah. When I came back, Sarah was sleepy. Linda was on a video call showing off the house. She laughed and called the house an antique. Sarah listened quietly from her chair. When the call ended, Sarah smiled at me sweetly. I asked if she wanted tea, but she said no. I made her comfortable and watched the sun set. At night, I went to the basement to get paint. I turned on the light. It smelled like old wood and dust. I saw Grandpa Ernest's old wine bottles. I touched one from 1978. The house held his history, but it felt different now. I turned off the light and went upstairs. I whispered that the house breathes, but not with our breath anymore. I listened to the clock for a moment. Then I went back to Sarah's room. She was sleeping well. I held her hand and thought about how I belonged to this house. My day ended with love and sadness. I have learned to live in a house that is losing its voices. The next day started with light rain. I woke up early. The rain sounded nice on the windows. I listened to the wind for a minute. The room smelled like wood and medicine. I turned on the lamp. It lit up our wedding picture. I got dressed and went into the hall. The floor creaked under my feet. That sound used to make me smile, but now it reminded me of strangers. Daniel's door was open. A screen was glowing inside. A woman on the phone was talking about fashion. Linda was on the bed with a face mask on. The room smelled like perfume. I went to the kitchen. It felt more like my space. I started making breakfast. I made coffee, oatmeal, and an egg. When the coffee was ready, I heard footsteps. It was Linda in her robe. She leaned on the door and made a face. She complained that it smelled like butter. I didn't answer and just cooked the egg. She sighed and opened the window to let the cold rain in. Then she sprayed strong perfume. It smelled like metal and covered the food smell. She said that was better and took a picture of the breakfast. She posted it online, smiling at her phone. Daniel came in dressed for work. He asked if I was doing the garden because the gardener canceled. I said I would handle it. He nodded and checked his watch. Linda gave him coffee and fixed his jacket. She reminded him of a meeting. He kissed her and said a decorator was coming for the kitchen. I paused while pouring coffee. Those words hurt me. They talked about changing the house and selling the farm. They spoke like these things didn't matter. When I finished, I took Sarah's tray upstairs carefully. She was awake and looking at the rain from her chair. I smiled and told her I brought her coffee. I helped her sit up and held the cup for her. Then I gave her medicine, cleaned her hands, and opened the window for fresh air. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered that the girl doesn't look me in the eyes. I didn't know what to say, so I just told her to rest. By mid-morning, I heard laughing and new voices in the house. I went downstairs and saw Linda with 3 young women holding phones. Linda spoke to me in a rude way and said she invited friends for a casual lunch. There was wine, food, and a strange vase on the table. A girl took a photo by the window and said the house was beautiful and old. Another girl laughed and said it looked like a movie set. I tried to be polite by serving water and bread. Sarah was lying on the sofa downstairs, covering her eyes because of the noise. They laughed for hours while Linda showed them the house. I heard her bragging about fixing up the house to make it modern. When they left, the house became heavy with silence. I went to Sarah's room, tucked her in, and went to the patio. It was cloudy and wet outside. Later, while I worked in the garden, I heard voices because Linda called some workers. They had tools and paint books, and one man was measuring the window. I asked what they were doing, and Linda smiled and said they were changing curtains and painting to add light. I told her slowly that my father painted these walls himself. She shrugged and said it was time to make them modern. The sound of the pencil on the wall hurt me, so I stopped talking. I grabbed my coat and stood in the rain on the patio for a while. When I came back inside, the men were gone, and the room smelled like dust and perfume. That night, Daniel brought home expensive wine and smiled tensely at me. He said he would bring better wine next time to celebrate the new look of the house. I didn't answer and just sat by the window listening to the rain. They were laughing in the dining room. I looked at the wine and thought about how my father built this house by hand. Every mark had a story, but now they were erasing everything. I got up to turn off the lights and heard voices from their slightly open room. I stood still and heard them speaking. Linda whispered that I was a good man but lived in the past. She said I wouldn't be missed. The silence after that hurt more than screaming. I stepped back and felt something inside me die out like a candle. I went to my room where Sarah was sleeping calmly. I sat by her and told her I would make coffee earlier, even though she couldn't hear. I held her hand while the church clock struck midnight. I watched the rain falling outside. I knew that everything would change tomorrow. Saturday morning was clear and warm with sunlight coming in. I woke up early and smelled the damp earth. I heard birds and a car engine outside. For a moment, the house felt quiet and normal. While making tea, I heard Daniel talking firmly on the phone outside. He told someone to close a deal today regardless of the price. He sounded like he did as a demanding child, but now he wore a suit. I watched him in his white shirt and shiny watch. He paced around, looking nothing like the boy who used to play there. Linda came out and put a fancy beige tablecloth on the garden table. I realized she had removed Sarah's old lace tablecloth. She told Daniel it looked better with the new walls. I continued making tea, but I felt upset. When Sarah woke up, I helped her with her pillows and tray. She asked if it was sunny, and I told her yes. While I gave her medicine, Daniel came into the kitchen with a fake smile. He asked me to come to the dining room to talk. I told Sarah to rest and went downstairs feeling sad. The dining room was bright and breezy with the new curtains. There was a leather folder and 2 glasses of wine on the table. Linda smiled sweetly and poured me wine, saying it was just a toast. I sat down but didn't drink. Daniel sat across from me with his hands on the table. He looked serious, like he was doing business. "Dad," he said, "we looked at some legal papers for the house." He opened the folder carefully. He took out papers with red stamps that I didn't know. The first page said, "Transfer of property." "We don't want problems later," he said. "If you sign this, it will be easier." I looked at him. "When is later?" I asked. Daniel looked away. Linda put her hand on the papers. "It's just a rule," she said quickly. "It helps avoid taxes and lawyers. You know how hard that can be." "I know," I said slowly. "But why the rush?" Daniel sounded impatient. "The house needs a plan. You are tired, Dad. Let us handle it." "I am not tired," I said. "I am just old. It is not the same thing." Linda laughed nervously. "Don't be upset, David. It is for your own good. We want you and Sarah to relax." I saw a pen on the papers. It scared me. They had planned everything. Sign, toast, smile, and leave. I put my hand on the folder. "No," I said. The room went silent. "What do you mean, no?" Linda asked with a frown. "We want to help." "I am not signing," I said. "This house is mine." Daniel leaned forward. "Dad, we live here and pay bills. We help Mom. It makes sense. You live under my roof," I told him. "And I take care of my wife." He leaned back and tapped the table. "Be smart," he said. "Mom needs real help. I found a place called Oakwood Senior outside the city. It is nice." I was confused. "What?" I asked. Linda spoke fast. "It has doctors all day and gardens. You can visit on weekends." I stared at her. The wine in her glass looked bright red. "You want to put your mother in a home?" Daniel looked down. "It's not a home," he said quietly. "It is moving forward." I heard a spoon hit a cup in the next room. It was Sarah. She heard us. I stood up. "We will not talk about this again," I said. Daniel tried to stop me, but I walked away. My room felt cool. I closed the door and leaned on it. My heart beat fast. I couldn't forget my son giving me those papers. I taught him to walk, but now he looked at me like a problem. That night, I heard whispers. Daniel and Linda were talking in the living room. "Your father doesn't understand," she said. "If he won't sign, we have to do it our way." "Yes, but it must look real." "I don't want trouble," he replied. Then it was quiet. I opened my window. The wind smelled of rain and flowers. The bell rang 11 times. I knew something was broken forever. The next morning, the dining room was empty. Some pages were missing from the table. Linda smiled sharply. "Relax," she said. "We put them away to keep them clean." The mail came later. I got a heavy letter from a notary. I didn't open it. I hid it in a drawer and didn't tell Sarah. The day was quiet. I did my chores, but I felt angry inside. At night, I saw a light in the office. The door was open a little. Daniel was copying papers. Linda was checking signatures on a screen. "This one looks wrong," she said. "Make it match." "No one will know," he said. I stood still in the doorway. I touched the cold wood. I watched them to see who they really were. When they finished, they turned off the light and went upstairs laughing. I stayed in the dark. My shadow was long on the floor. My hand shook, but not because I was scared. I closed my eyes. The clock struck midnight. The house seemed to watch me. For the first time, I knew the danger was inside my own home. I made a promise to myself. If they wanted to play a game, I would learn how to play it first. The sun shone bright and hard through the curtains that morning. The house was very quiet. I didn't hear the radio, the clock, or the birds. I only heard the ceiling fan spinning slowly. Linda left early wearing sunglasses and carrying a purse. She told me she was going to buy flowers because the house needed life. She didn't look at me or wait for an answer. She slammed the door and walked away. I made Sarah's breakfast quietly. I made eggs, toast, and tea for her cough. I helped her up and took her to the porch. It was hot outside and smelled like flowers. She enjoyed the sun for a moment but said it was too hot. I fanned her with a newspaper. I went back to the kitchen and saw Daniel. He was holding coffee and looked tense. He looked at me like I was annoying him, which I hated. "Dad," he said seriously, "we need to talk, and you need to listen." I didn't answer and kept cleaning the table. Daniel stepped in and slammed his cup down. Coffee spilled on the table. "You can't live in the past," he said. "Mom needs help that you can't give her." I breathed slowly. "You said that yesterday," I whispered. He sighed and looked at me with a dark look. "Come downstairs," he said suddenly. "I want to show you something." "What is happening?" I asked, but he didn't answer. He grabbed my arm hard. He pushed me toward the basement stairs. I tried to get away, but he was too strong. "Go down," he said. "It is important." We walked down the steps. The air got cold and wet. It smelled like mold. The lights were off. At the bottom, I reached for the light switch. Daniel pushed me hard. I tripped on a box and fell. The noise was loud. "Daniel!" I yelled. The door slammed shut and locked. I hit the door with my hands. "Daniel, open the door," I shouted. He spoke calmly from the other side. "The house is ours now, Dad. Rest." I heard him walk away, and then it was quiet. My heart beat fast. It was very dark. I found the switch and turned it on. The light flickered and then stayed on. "What is happening, David?" Sarah asked from the stairs. She was holding the railing and looked pale. I ran to her. "Calm down," I said. "It is just a mistake." I helped her sit on the steps and held her cold hands. I tried to open the door, but it was locked. "He locked us in," she whispered. I didn't say anything. I tried to stay calm. The basement looked the same as when I was young. It had stone walls and smelled like old wine and dirt. I saw Grandpa Ernest's dusty wine bottles on the shelf. I moved some boxes to make a bench. "Sit here," I told Sarah. She sat down, shaking. I went to look for water. I found an old jug with some water in it. It smelled okay, so I poured some into a cup for her. We heard the garage door open and the car drive away. Daniel and Linda left. It was very quiet. "They left us here on purpose," Sarah cried. "Please don't say that," I said. We sat there listening to the house noises. We heard pipes creaking and water dripping. An hour or two passed. The light bulb kept flickering. I used my pocket knife to open a tin of sardines. I shared the food with Sarah. She didn't want to eat, but I told her she needed strength. She ate a little bit. The fish tasted like metal. It was hard to eat because I was so angry. When Sarah fell asleep, I walked around the basement. I looked at everything in the dim light. I saw a shelf full of old tools. I remembered coming here with Grandpa Ernest years ago. He taught me how to fix the garden pipes. He told me that a man must know the heart of his house. I opened a rusty cabinet. It had nails, a flashlight, a hammer, and a screwdriver. I put them in my pockets. The air smelled like old paint and wet wood. Breathing hurt my throat. The floor creaked when I walked. I went to the back wall where the bottles were. The wall had stains and a long crack. I touched it. It felt cold and rough. I touched another part of the wall. It sounded hollow. I tapped it gently with the hammer. The sound was light. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked, waking up. "Nothing, love," I said. "I am just checking for air." She nodded and went back to sleep. Her breathing was heavy. I turned on the flashlight. It still had a little bit of light. I looked at the wall closely. One brick stuck out a little bit. I pushed it with my fingers. It moved. I pushed harder. The brick came loose and left a hole. My heart jumped. I reached inside. I felt something cold and metal. I pulled it out carefully. It was an old Lucky Strike tobacco box. It was rusty, but I could read the name. I looked at it, confused. My hand shook. "What is that?" Sarah asked weakly. "I don't know," I said. "Someone hid it a long time ago." I sat on the floor next to her. The box was sealed tight. It felt heavy. It had something inside. The air in the basement felt heavy too. I heard the water dripping. I put the box on my knees and looked at it under the light. The metal shined for a second. Sarah looked at me. "David, what will you do?" she asked. "I don't know," I said, but I really did know. I held the box carefully. I realized that Daniel thought he had trapped me. But he actually opened a door he didn't expect. I wasn't scared of the dark anymore. I knew there were secrets here waiting to be found. I touched the lid with my thumb. Sarah fell asleep on my shoulder. I turned off the flashlight. I listened to her breathe. The box felt heavy in my hand. I held it to my chest and closed my eyes. I knew everything was just beginning. The light bulb flickered. The air was wet and thick. Water dripped slowly from a pipe. Each drop marked the time passing. I moved some boxes to make space. Dust rose up and made me cough. It smelled like rotten wood. I tasted metal in my mouth. "What time is it?" Sarah asked weakly. I looked at Grandpa Ernest's pocket watch. It had stopped at 9:15 years ago. "I don't know," I said. "But it must be noon." She sighed. Her breathing sounded like a whistle. I covered her with my jacket. Her hands were cold. I turned on the flashlight again. It flickered but stayed on. It was dim, but I could see the walls. I walked around checking corners. I saw old wine bottles on a shelf. I touched one labeled, Reserve 1978. I wiped it clean and saw Ernest Miller's name on the cork. I shined the light on the back wall. I saw a crack between the bricks. The wall looked strange. I tapped it with the hammer. It sounded hollow. My heart beat faster. I remembered something from when I was 14. I remembered coming here with Grandpa Ernest. He had a lamp and a tired smile. "I kept something here, David," he told me. "Something for desperate times." Back then, I didn't understand. I thought he meant money or wine. Now I understood. I put the flashlight on the floor. I used the screwdriver to loosen the brick. Dust fell from the wall. "What are you doing, David?" Sarah asked, trying to get up. "Nothing dangerous, love. Just checking," I said without looking at her. The brick moved a little. I pushed harder. Finally, it slid out and left a dark hole. The air smelled like metal and old paper. I reached in and felt something hard and cold. I pulled it out. It was a rusty Lucky Strike tobacco box. It was covered in gray dust. I shook it gently. Something inside jingled like coins. "What did you find?" Sarah asked weakly. "I don't know, but it must be important," I answered. I knelt down and tried to open the box. It was stuck. I used the screwdriver to pry it open. It clicked and opened. Inside was a package wrapped in old yellow paper and tied with string. I untied it. There were 3 folded sheets of paper inside. The first was a birth certificate. I read the name Mark Taylor, born June 12, 1948. I froze. That was my birthday. The second paper was for adoption. It was signed by Ernest Miller. It said Mark Taylor legally became David Miller. The third paper was a letter. It was worn out but had Grandpa Ernest's handwriting. "If you are reading this, son, it is because you are in need," it said. I felt a lump in my throat. Sarah came closer. "What does it say?" she whispered. I began to read aloud. "Your real name is Mark Taylor. Your father, William Taylor, was a government advisor. He was falsely accused of betraying the country. He died in prison to protect you and your mother. I changed your name so you could be safe. You are my son, but remember your history. Do not let anyone stain it." My voice shook when I finished. Sarah was crying. "Your real father?" she asked. "Yes, and Grandpa Ernest knew everything," I said. I sat next to her holding the cold box. It felt heavy with secrets. I thought about Grandpa Ernest hiding this alone. Suddenly, we heard a loud thud upstairs, like a door closing. I stood up quickly. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Sarah nodded and looked scared. I turned off the flashlight. We listened in the dark. I wasn't sure if it was footsteps or the wind. A car drove by outside. I checked the door at the top of the stairs. I saw light under it, but heard no sound. "Maybe it was the wind," I told Sarah. She looked exhausted. I put my jacket around her. I put the papers back in the box and closed it. The click made me shiver. I looked at the box. It held a truth that could destroy those who thought they controlled me. I felt a strange calm. I wasn't the same man who fell down the stairs. I thought of Daniel and Linda upstairs. They thought I was defeated. They didn't know I found something that could change everything. I took Sarah's hand. "There is something he doesn't know, love," I whispered. "Something that changes everything." She looked at me tenderly. I turned off the light. The box shined in the dark. The water kept dripping slowly. Under the earth of the Miller house, my true family story was just beginning. Time seemed to stop in the basement. I didn't know if it was day or night. The bulb flickered. When it went out, the silence was so loud I could hear my own heart. There was no clock, no sun rays, nor the distant sound of church bells, only the incessant dripping of the rusty pipe and Sarah's weak breathing. I stayed next to her, sitting on the floor, caressing her hair. Every time she breathed, her chest rose and fell with difficulty. She had started to tremble, so I covered her with my jacket, and with an old rag I found inside a box. Suddenly, I heard the familiar noise of tires on gravel. I sat up abruptly. Daniel and Linda had returned. The car engine stopped. The slam was heard then, their steps on the hallway floor. I put a finger on Sarah's lips. "Silence, love. Do not say anything." She nodded and her eyes filled with fear. Upstairs, the voices resonated, muffled by the thickness of the walls. "If anyone asks, say they went down by accident," Daniel said, his tone cold authoritarian. "And if they do not believe it," Linda answered, "we will say it was a misunderstanding. No one will come to check an old house." Their steps approached the basement. The door creaked and a burst of white light descended the stairs, blinding me for an instant. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his tie undone, his face haggard, his eyes red. He carried a bottle of water in one hand and a small bag in the other. "Have you thought about what you will do, Dad?" he asked with a tired voice, but without a trace of compassion. I held his gaze. "Your mother needs air and medicine," I answered him. He exhaled through his nose, frustrated. You always dramatize. He leaned in a little and threw the bottle in the bag toward the floor. There you go. Think about what suits you. Then he slammed the door shut. The sound of the bolt went down the walls like a metallic echo that pierced my chest. I knelt down and picked up the bottle. I opened it and brought it to Sarah's lips. Drink slowly. I told her little by little. She drank carefully, closing her eyes. I wiped her mouth with a handkerchief and helped her lie back on the coat. For a few minutes only, the sound of water moving in the bottle was heard. Then she looked at me, eyes shining under the trembling light. David, she whispered, what was that you were reading last night? I took out the Lucky Strike box from the hole where I had hidden it. I placed it on my knees, opened it, and unfolded the papers with trembling hands. I spread the first one, the birth certificate, on my legs so she could see it. Her finger, thin and pale, slid over the letters. Mark Taylor. She read the name once, then another. She looked up at me. So you are not Grandpa Ernest's son. I shook my head slowly. No, not by blood. He adopted me. He saved me. But my true name was another, a name he wanted to protect. I took out the letter. The letters were almost erased in some parts, but I could distinguish them enough to read them aloud. The honor of a man is not destroyed by the accusation, but by the silence with which he accepts it, I said, letting Grandpa Nest's words fill the damp air. Sarah closed her eyes. Her lips barely moved as if she were praying. Your true father, she said at last. Who was he, William Taylor? A man history erased. They accused him of being a traitor in 1952. But according to this letter, he died to protect his family. She looked at me for a long time. There was sadness, but also pride in her eyes. Then Daniel knows nothing. No, I answered her. And if he knew, his whole world would collapse. She nodded slowly. Why does he live off that last name? She murmured. Off Miller, off a man who does not belong to him, as he believes. I remained silent. The words floated in the air like suspended dust. I leaned over the box again and noticed something I had overlooked before. A piece of folded paper at the bottom, smaller than the others. I took it out. It was a bank receipt, almost illegible, but I recognized the stamp. Central Bank. In the header, a name, Taylor Fund. The document indicated that the account was in the name of William Taylor with inheritance rights transferred to his direct descendant, Mark Taylor Miller. I stared at those words again and again. This, I said in a low voice, this changes everything. Sarah watched me, not fully understanding. What is it a proof? I explained to her. Grandpa Ernest kept this secret to protect me and to protect the inheritance my father left. She squeezed my hand. What are you going to do? I still do not know. But now I have something they do not expect. The letter of a dead man and the power of a forgotten name. I wrapped the documents in the cloth again and kept them in the box. Then I looked for a deeper hole in the wall behind the old bottles. I took out 2 loose bricks and hid the box inside, covering it with dust and wood. If they try to come down again, they must not see it, I said. Sarah nodded. Her breathing began to get shorter, as if the air cost her more. She coughed several times. I knelt next to her, rubbed her back, and gave her a little water. Calm down, my love. Hold on a little longer. The ceiling bulb began to flicker, and finally went out. Darkness fell suddenly dense, absolute. Do not move, I told her, groping among the boxes until I found the toolbox. I touched a small power outlet on the wall with my fingers. I unscrewed the cover, peeled the cables with a knife, and joined them with a piece of old electrical tape. A spark flashed, and the bulb turned on again. It was weak but steady. The yellow light made the sweat on Sarah's face shine. Suddenly, I heard the lock move above us. Someone was trying to open the door. Daniel! I shouted. It went silent. The metal sound stopped. I heard footsteps walk away. I stared at the door and held my breath. I felt cold all over. They will come back, I whispered. Sarah looked at me with fear. "What will you do?" she asked. "I will make them listen," I said. "About what?" she asked. "About who I really am and my blood," I answered. She held my hand tight. "Be careful, David, or Mark," she said. "I don't know what to call you." I smiled a little. "Call me what you always do," I said. "Names change destiny, but not love." I helped her up. We walked to the stairs and looked up at the door. A thin line of light shone on the floor. I held the box inside my jacket. The cold metal gave me a purpose. I looked at the light. I wasn't scared anymore. I felt calm and determined. For the first time, I knew who I was. I wasn't just David Miller, the weak old father. I was Mark Taylor. The truth was going to tear down the walls of this house. The next morning was gray. Dust floated in the air like time had stopped. I heard a car engine outside. It was Daniel. The basement door opened loudly. My son stood there in the light. He looked tired but mean. "Don't starve, old man," he said with a smirk. He threw a bag and a water bottle down. "Think about it." He slammed the door locked. The sound echoed like thunder. I waited a moment. I picked up the bag. Inside was hard bread, ham, and half a bottle of water. Sarah coughed weakly. I helped her sit and gave her water. I wiped her face. Her skin was very cold. "Calm down, love," I whispered. "It is almost over." When she lay down, I checked the tobacco box in my pocket. The papers were still there. The car drove away. The house was silent again. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was stuck at 11:12. It was cruel that time moved upstairs but stopped down here. I looked at the old wall phone. It was broken and dusty. Then I remembered Sarah's old mobile phone in her jacket. I took it out carefully. It was dusty but turned on. The battery was low. I checked the contacts. There were 3 numbers: Dr. Evans, Daniel, and Robert Vance. I remembered Vance. He was a lawyer I worked with years ago. He was an honest man. I waited for Sarah to fall asleep. Her breathing was slow. I walked up 2 steps to get a signal. I got 1 bar. I called Robert Vance. A woman answered. "This is David Miller," I said calmly. "I need to see Mr. Vance today. It is about inheritance and fraud." "Mr. Vance has an opening at 4 p.m., she said. "Confirmed," I whispered. I hung up quickly to save the battery. I covered the screen light. I knelt beside sleeping Sarah. "We will get out of here this afternoon," I promised her. "I swear." I thought about my plan. The phone was almost dead. I had to use the phone at the right time. I checked the box to make sure all papers were there. I saw the certificate, the letter, and the bank paper. I wrapped them in a cloth and put them in my coat. The air got heavy and hot. It smelled like wet earth. Sarah slept on and off. At 3 p.m., I heard the car again. I heard the gate and doors closing. The lock moved. Daniel stood at the door looking mean. "Did you change your mind?" he asked. I pretended to be weak and leaned on the wall. "Mom needs a doctor," I said tiredly. "She needs fresh air or she will die." Linda shouted from upstairs. "Let him go. Just make him sign later." Daniel waited, then agreed. "I will let you out for 1 hour," he said. "Do not try anything." I helped Sarah up the stairs. The wood creaked. The bright daylight hurt our eyes. The fresh air made me dizzy. Daniel watched us closely. "We are not in a hurry," he said falsely. We went into the living room. It smelled like perfume and dust. I got a clean jacket from the bedroom. I hid the metal box in the pocket. Daniel watched me. "Call the doctor on my phone," he said. "I want to hear." I nodded and called the number I memorized. When they answered, I spoke carefully. "Doctor, I need an appointment now," I said. "I am bringing my wife's papers." Robert Vance answered firmly. "I will see you at 4 at the main office," he said. I hung up. "It is done," I said. "The doctor is waiting." Daniel checked his watch. 1 hour, he said. "Don't try anything." I nodded. I helped Sarah walk out. The sun shone on the orange tree in the patio. The wind smelled like jasmine. It felt normal and beautiful for a moment. We walked outside. My knees shook, but I kept walking. At the corner, I waved my hand. A yellow taxi stopped. I helped Sarah in and told the driver the address. The Vance Building on Main Street. The driver started the car. Daniel watched us from the door. He pointed at his watch to remind me of the time. I nodded and closed the door. The taxi drove through the narrow streets. It smelled like gas and leather inside. Sarah looked pale but hopeful. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To someone who can help us," I whispered. She squeezed my hand. The city looked gold in the afternoon light. I saw kids playing and clothes hanging on balconies. Everything looked normal. I took the box out of my pocket and looked at it quickly. The metal shone a little. I held it and thought about Grandpa Ernest and William Taylor. They made me who I am. I thought the past was gone. Now I knew that truth just waits to be found. The driver turned on the radio. An old song played. Sarah recognized it and smiled. "I haven't heard this in years," she said. I smiled too. I felt like I had a second chance. The taxi drove toward downtown. The city passed by us. I felt calm and sure of myself. I squeezed Sarah's hand. I knew that the phone call changed everything. We were heading toward freedom. We arrived at the Stone Building at 3:50 p.m. A sign said, "Vance and Associates, Attorneys at Law." The sign was bright. Walking felt heavy. I helped Sarah get out. The driver looked at us but didn't ask questions. I paid him and we walked to the door. The hallway had old tiles that echoed. It smelled like wax and old paper inside. It reminded me of Grandpa Ernest's office. It felt orderly and respectful. A young secretary recognized us. "Mr. Miller, Lawyer Vance is expecting you," she said. I nodded because I was too tired to speak. Sarah advanced slowly, her weight heavy on my arm, the gray wool scarf wound tight around her neck as if to strangle the fear rising in her throat. The hallway leading to Vance's office stretched out before us, a tunnel of flickering fluorescent lights and peeling paint. Every step echoed, a rhythmic countdown that hammered against my ribs. Vance's office waited at the end of the corridor, the last door on the left. It was ajar, a sliver of darkness leaking out into the hall. Through the gap, the distant, muffled roar of Main Street drifted in. Sirens, horns, the chaotic soundtrack of a world that didn't know our lives were about to end. I pushed the door open. The hinges screamed, a high-pitched whine that made Sarah flinch. Vance stood immediately. He was a silhouette against the blinds, cutting a sharp figure in the dim room. He didn't look like a lawyer in that moment. He looked like a gravekeeper waiting for a delivery. "I knew I would see you again, Mr. Miller," he said. His tone was warm, practiced, but I saw the way his eyes darted to the door behind us, checking if we were alone. "What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." His voice was serene, a professional mask, but his eyes perceived the vibration of my hands, the sweat beading on my hairline. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Words felt too dangerous, too fragile to carry the weight of what I had brought. I sat in the stiff leather chair across from his mahogany desk. Sarah sank into the sofa behind me, her breathing shallow and ragged. Without a word, I reached into my coat pocket. My fingers brushed the cold, rusted metal. I pulled out the Lucky Strike tobacco box and placed it on the polished wood. Clink. The sound was soft, but in the silence of the office, it sounded like the cocking of a gun. The rusty metal jingled as I slid it forward. "Here is everything," I whispered. My voice sounded foreign, scratchy and old. I opened the lid with agonizing slowness. The smell of stale tobacco and decaying paper wafted up, the scent of secrets kept in the dark for 40 years. Inside lay the papers I had guarded with my life. The edges were yellowed, the ink fading to brown. Vance adjusted his glasses, the lenses catching the lamplight. He reached out, his movements precise, almost surgical. He extracted the first sheet, the birth certificate. Name: Mark Taylor. He placed it on the desk. Then the second, the adoption certificate, signed by Ernest Miller. And finally, the handwritten letter, the ink stained with tears that had dried decades ago, and the bank document detailing the assets of the Taylor Fund. Vance read. The silence stretched, tight as a piano wire. I watched his face. I saw the moment the pieces clicked together. His expression shifted from mild curiosity to confusion, and finally, to cold, hard astonishment. He stopped breathing for a second. "This," he murmured, his voice barely audible. He looked up, his eyes wide, stripping away the layers of David Miller to see the man hiding underneath. "This changes everything. The entire lineage, the estate." He ran his fingers over the letter, reading fragments again as if checking for a trap. He looked me dead in the eye. "Does your son Daniel know this? Does he know who you really are? Does he know about the fund?" I denied it firmly, though my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "No, and he must not. If he finds out that I have the original deed, that his claim to the property is based on a lie, he'll kill for it," Vance finished for me. The lawyer fell silent. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the electricity of an approaching storm. Vance didn't just see a family dispute anymore. He saw the crime scene before it happened. He grabbed a notepad and wrote with furious, slashing strokes. He slammed his hand on the intercom button. "Laura," he barked, his voice devoid of its earlier warmth. "Prepare an eviction order. Immediate effect. Cite document fraud. And get the notary in here. I need a signature verification. High priority. I want the courier ready in 10 minutes. While he spoke, his tone became technical, cold, a weapon being sharpened. But beneath the professionalism was a contained flame, a silent indignation. He was angry. He realized how close we had come to losing everything. He hung up and leaned over the desk, invading my personal space. "I need you to sign a power of attorney to represent you. Right now," Vance commanded. "This will not be just a family matter, Mr. Miller. This is no longer a civil dispute. It is a case of grand larceny, forgery, and asset fraud. If Daniel has accessed those accounts, he has crossed a line we cannot uncross." I nodded, trembling. The pen he offered felt like a lead weight. I hovered the tip over the paper. Who was I signing as? I pressed the pen down. David Miller. Or perhaps Mark Taylor. It no longer mattered which name I used. Both were targets. The door opened, and the secretary entered with 2 cups of tea. The normalcy of the action was jarring. The aroma of ginger filled the room, masking the smell of old fears. Sarah took her cup with both hands, the china rattling against the saucer. Her gaze was lost in the bookshelves, where names of laws and sentences accumulated like silent witnesses to other battles. She looked transparent, fading away under the pressure. Vance closed the folder. The sound was final. He tapped it gently on the table. "You will have a visit at your house in 24 hours, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The authorities will be with me. Until then, you are in the danger zone." He leaned in closer. "Stay calm. Do not confront your son. Do not let him know you were here. If he asks, you went to the doctor. Leave him to me. And if he comes to the house tonight?" I asked, the words catching. "Lock your bedroom door," Vance said grimly. I pressed my lips together and nodded. I had no words, only a terrifying gratitude. Upon leaving, the afternoon air hit us like a physical blow. It seemed fresher, but sharp, biting. I stopped a taxi, my head on a swivel, scanning the parked cars for Daniel's silver sedan. I helped Sarah up, her bones feeling fragile as bird wings under her coat. "Historic district," I told the driver, keeping my voice low. The car clock marked 6:15. The sun began to fall, dyeing the facades of the city a melancholic golden color. Long shadows stretched across the upholstery, looking like grasping fingers. "Now," Sarah whispered, not looking away from the horizon, her eyes fixed on the blurring streetlights. "Now we will wait." I squeezed her hand. It was ice cold. The taxi turned onto our street. "Don't stop in front," I ordered the driver suddenly, panic flaring in my chest. "Go to the back alley. Behind the garden." The driver grunted but turned. We arrived at the back street, the one lined with high walls and dry bougainvilleas that rattled in the wind like dry bones. I paid the driver and waited for him to leave before we moved. I didn't want Daniel to see us from the living room window. If he saw the taxi, if he saw the folder tucked inside my jacket, he would know. We crept to the back gate. It was unlatched. I froze. I always latched the gate. I pushed it open inch by inch. The garden was silent. Too silent. The birds had stopped singing. I guided Sarah toward the kitchen door, stepping carefully to avoid the loose gravel. We reached the threshold. I reached for my keys, my hand shaking so badly I dropped them. Clatter. The noise echoed like a gunshot in the quiet yard. We both froze, staring at the dark kitchen window. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a light flicked on inside the kitchen. A shadow moved across the glass, tall and broad. The back door handle began to turn. Daniel was home. We entered through the patio door slowly without making noise. Inside, everything seemed calm. Linda was talking on the phone, loudly mentioning Miami Mom and the new decorator. Daniel was on the sofa watching the news, a glass of whiskey in his hand. I placed Sarah in her favorite armchair next to the window. "The doctor says she needs rest," I announced with a neutral voice. Daniel did not even look at me. "Fine," he said simply without looking away from the TV. During the night, I feigned normality. I prepared a light soup, turned off the lights early, but my head did not rest for a second. When dawn broke, the house was quieter than ever. Daniel left early in his gray suit, and Linda spent the morning surfing on her tablet. Suspecting nothing. At 11:05, the doorbell rang. I looked at Sarah. She understood without words. I went to the door and looked through the side window. A dark car was parked in front of the gate. From it, Robert Vance got down, accompanied by a young assistant with a brown leather folder. I opened the door calmly. "Come in, counselor," I said, holding the latch. Vance entered, greeted with courtesy, and his assistant followed, carrying documents. From upstairs, I heard the sound of fast steps. Daniel was coming down the stairs, adjusting his tie. "What is happening here?" he asked with a mixture of annoyance and surprise. Vance looked directly at him. "Legal notification," he said, extending a yellow envelope. "Eviction order and complaint for document forgery." Daniel snatched the envelope from his hands and opened it with fury. His eyes moved fast from one paragraph to another. The color left his face. "Fraud. What does this mean?" Linda appeared behind him, still in a robe with the phone in her hand. "This cannot be," she murmured. "There must be a mistake." Vance, impassive, adjusted his glasses. "The transfer you presented has the signature of a notary who died 2 years ago. Everything indicates a forgery. Furthermore," he paused, letting the tension grow, "an investigation could be opened regarding your lineage and the source of the funds you used." An icy silence filled the room. I was standing next to Sarah with my hand on her shoulder. She breathed with difficulty, but in her eyes was something resembling serenity. Daniel looked at me with a mixture of fear and rage. "You cannot do this to me. I am a miller." Vance smiled barely. "Perhaps not," he answered. "If you prefer, I can make it public tomorrow." Linda stepped back. Her hand trembled while looking for her husband's. "Daniel, let's go," she whispered. He looked at her, not knowing what to say. Then he gritted his teeth, turned around, and went up the stairs. The slam of the door resonated like a shot. Vance and his assistant collected the folders and signed a minute on the dining table. "You have 30 days to vacate the property," he said, "but honestly I doubt they will wait that long." I shook his hand. "Thank you, counselor," I said. He nodded. He knew this was the end of something big. "Justice can be late, Mr. Miller, but it comes." When they left, it was quiet. Daniel came out of his room looking upset. "My clients will find out," he whispered to himself. I didn't answer. I opened the curtains to let the warm light in. That afternoon, I heard them arguing and crying. Linda was sobbing, and Daniel threw something on the floor. At 11 p.m., I heard the car trunk close. I looked out the window. They put their bags in the car without talking. They drove away into the dark streets. I closed the gate. The house was silent again. I only heard the clock and smelled the orange blossoms. I turned off all the lights except one by Grandpa Ernest's picture. The light shone on his serious face. I stood there and felt the house breathe with me. The silence felt clean, like the lies were gone. The next morning was bright. The sun shone on the dust in the air. The silence felt heavy. At 8:30 a.m., a truck stopped at the gate. 2 men in blue jackets got out. They started loading boxes and bags. Daniel watched them with his arms crossed. He looked tired and thin. He didn't look confident anymore. Linda was on the phone wearing sunglasses and a hat. "Tell Mom we will be in Miami tonight," she said loudly. I opened the door slowly. "Your mother is resting," I said quietly. "Do not disturb her." Daniel looked at me tiredly. He didn't say anything. He just turned away. The men kept working. I put the envelope from Robert Vance on the table. It was the legal paper saying the house was mine. Daniel saw it and signed his copy with a shaking hand. A newspaper fell from his coat. The headline said, "Forgery Scandal Rocks Miller Investments." He read it and looked scared. "Who leaked it?" he asked weakly. "Truth travels fast, son," I said. Linda snorted. "We don't have to listen to this." "Let's go," she said. She told the workers to hurry. I saw our neighbor, Mr. Harris, outside. He nodded at me with a smile. He understood. The truck left. Daniel and Linda got in their car and drove away without looking back. When the gate closed, the house felt lighter. The silence was deep. I looked at the tire tracks and knew the wind would blow them away. At noon, Robert Vance called. "The press knows everything," he said. "They have been removed from the board. They can't use their accounts." "Thank you," I said. I went to the patio. It smelled like wet leaves and flowers. The orange tree was blooming. At 4 p.m., the postman brought a letter from the bank. I opened it. It said, "Taylor Fund accounts reactivated. Holder Mark Taylor Miller." I read my name 3 times. It was the name that had been hidden for 50 years. I signed the receipt and put the letter in Grandpa Ernest's chest under the stairs. I closed with a click that sounded like justice served. The rest of the day passed slow, peaceful. At nightfall, Sarah woke up. The golden light of the sunset bathed her pale face. "Did they leave?" she asked with a thread of voice. I nodded. "Yes, love. They left." She said nothing more. She took my hand, her skin cool against mine, and offered a slight, fractured smile. It was the kind of expression that buried a lifetime of silences and pardons, a silent treaty between 2 people who had watched their world collapse. The police lights had finally faded from the driveway, but the red and blue strobes still danced behind my eyelids. That night, I prowled the house like a stranger. Every room was a minefield of memory, threatening to detonate with grief. I hesitated before Daniel's door, my hand hovering over the cold brass knob. I pushed it open. Only shadows lived there now. The air was stale, choking on the scent of expensive cologne and fear. An empty bottle lay on the dresser alongside a pair of rolled-up socks, remnants of a hasty exit. A photo frame lay face down, as if the image itself couldn't bear to watch what had happened here. I lifted it. The glass was cracked. It was an old photo from his 10th birthday, the summer before the lies began. He was smiling next to Sarah and me, gripping the handlebars of his first bicycle. For a split second, the old, desperate impulse seized me, the need to justify him, to scrub the blood from the narrative, to believe there was still a kernel of goodness behind his fall. But I set the frame back down, face against the wood. Sometimes, a father's love isn't about protection. It is about letting the son face the guillotine of his own decisions. I covered the bed with a white sheet, draping it like a corpse, and closed the door. The latch clicked, a final, damning sound. In the garden, the air was heavy with the cloying scent of jasmine and impending rain. The gate groaned, and Arthur appeared, his slow step crunching on the gravel. He wore his straw hat, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the windows. "The silence sounds better today, right, David?" he asked, his voice low. He lifted a basket of oranges, a mundane offering in a time of war. "Yes, friend," I answered, watching the tree lean where I knew the reporters were still lurking. "Much better." We sat on the porch, two ghosts under the shade, sharing tea without haste. We didn't speak of the sirens, or the money, or the handcuffs. We spoke only of the weather and the buzz of bees, speaking in code to avoid the reality that lay just beneath the floorboards. As night fell, the peace became denser, almost suffocating. For the first time in years, the house breathed with me, not against me. But as Arthur left, the shadows stretched longer, reaching for me. I walked the hallways, extinguishing the lights one by one, plunging my life into darkness. I passed the study where Daniel used to work. The door was ajar. My heart hammered against my ribs. The leather chair was turned toward the window, positioned exactly as if someone had just stood up. "Daniel," I whispered, the name catching in my throat. Nothing but dust motes dancing in the gloom. I touched the backrest. The leather was still warm. I pulled my hand back as if burned. My imagination was playing cruel tricks, or perhaps the house wasn't quite empty yet. I continued to the basement door. The old lock stared at me, a brass eye that had seen too much. I turned the key. The air rushing up was damp, smelling of earth and secrets. I descended the stairs, the wood groaning under my weight. The gloom wrapped around me, clinging like wet silk. The hanging bulb swayed slightly, though there was no draft. I pulled the chain. The yellowish light flickered, buzzing like a dying insect, revealing the stains of time on the concrete walls. I walked to the far corner, my shadow looming tall and distorted against the cinder blocks. There it was. The loose brick. I knelt, my knees cracking on the hard floor. This was the hole that had guarded the past and returned the terrible truth to me. I rested my hand on the rough surface. It was empty now, but the weight of what I had found there, the ledger, the names, the proof, still felt heavy in my palms. "Thank you, old nest," I whispered. I closed my eyes and the memory washed over me. Daniel's voice years ago, pausing with a nobility he hadn't earned yet. "When the day comes, Dad, do the right thing, even if it hurts." And I had made the call. I stood up slowly, the silence of the basement screaming in my ears. I turned off the light, leaving the ghosts in the dark. In the distance, the church bells chimed 7 times, a toll for the living and the dead. I emerged into the garden just as the sky dyed a violent violet, wondering if the phone would ring again, and if I would have the strength to answer it. The wind blew the orange tree leaves. The smell of fresh flowers filled the air. I took a deep breath and felt calm. The house was peaceful. Sarah slept in the armchair with a blanket up to her neck. She looked calm. For the first time in a long time, I felt that winter was not cold. It brought justice, silence, and forgiveness. 6 months have passed since that night. The house is quiet again. The old district is awake with spring. There are new sounds in the streets. I wake up at 6 a.m. every day. I am used to it. I open the windows to let warm air and the smell of flowers in. I hear the bakers shouting and horses pulling carts nearby. The basement is not a dark, sad place anymore. I fixed it with my own hands. Now it is a bright study with light wood floors and white walls. The small window lets morning light shine on the shelves. I keep Grandpa Ernest's old notebooks and papers there. Sometimes I sit there quietly and listen to the house creak. Sarah says the place isn't sad anymore, and she is right. She sits by the living room window in her beige shawl. She is knitting a blue scarf. Her skin looks healthier. She moves slowly, but her warm smile is back. I remember that smile from when we first lived here. I give her a cup of hot chamomile tea. "Thank you, David," she says without looking up. "It smells like spring today." "Yes, love," I answer. "And peace." I sit across from her and open the newspaper. On page 3, there is a small note. It says Daniel Miller and Linda Rivas sold their property in Chicago and left the business world. I don't react. I fold the paper and put it on the table. Sarah watches me quietly. I don't need to say anything. We know that some stories end quietly. Later in the morning, Mr. Arthur Harris comes over. I hear his cane on the porch. He looks inside. "Good morning, David," he jokes. "The garden gave fruit before my knees gave out." He holds up a basket of tomatoes and bread. We laugh. I invite him into the new study. Arthur looked surprised at the changes. "Wow," he said, looking at the walls. "This doesn't look like a basement anymore. It looks like a new place." "It is," I said while pouring coffee. "Everything changes when you let the light in." Arthur put his cane down and looked at the shelves. "Are those Grandpa Ernest's notebooks?" he asked. "Yes," I explained. "I kept them. They have lessons in them that aren't taught, just inherited." He smiled. We put an old chessboard on the table. The wooden pieces were smooth from use. "You start since it is your board," he said. We played a few games. Sarah teased us from her chair. "Arthur, don't cheat." "I know you," she said. Arthur laughed and held up his hands. "Never, ma'am. I only use strategy." The morning passed with laughter and the sound of birds. At noon, we went to the garden. The sun shone softly on the orange tree. The air smelled fresh. Arthur and I trimmed the branches while bees buzzed around us. I saw a small nest with 3 chicks in the tree. "Life always returns," I said. Arthur wiped sweat from his face and nodded. "Sometimes it comes back quieter, but cleaner," he added. We stood quietly and listened to the city sounds. In the afternoon, it started to rain calmly. It was a rain that washed things clean. I helped Sarah close the windows, and we lit a lamp. The smell of wax and rain filled the room. The rain sounded nice on the roof. I went to the study and took out the old Lucky Strike box. I had cleaned and polished it. It still had dents, but it looked good. I put it on the shelf with the books. Sarah looked up from her knitting. "You still keep it?" she asked kindly. "Yes," I said. "It is part of our history and the truth." She smiled and nodded. At 7 p.m., the clock chimed. I turned on my desk lamp and wrote a sentence on a paper. "Blood can betray, but truth does not age." I let the ink dry and closed the notebook. I went out to the porch. The rain had stopped, but the streets were wet and shiny. The district smelled like warm bread and life. A group of young people played guitar nearby. The music sounded happy. I looked through the window at Sarah. The lamp lit her face. She looked peaceful, like someone who isn't afraid anymore. She smiled. That smile held everything I lost and everything I kept. Arthur walked by the gate and waved. "Until tomorrow, old friend," he shouted. "There will be sun tomorrow," I answered. I closed the door. I walked through the house, turning off the lights. I left only the study light on. It shone on the white walls where there used to be fear. The rain left a clean shine on the floor. I sit at the desk, look around and think that everything, even pain, has its place if given time and silence. I rest my hand on the tobacco box, that relic that changed my destiny. There is no rage nor gratitude. I murmur to myself as if speaking with Grandpa Ernest, with my true father, with all those who once taught me something without words. The true legacy was not the money nor the last name, but the dignity of not giving up. I look out the window. The city lights flicker under the clear sky. The wind drags the orange blossom perfume flooding the study. The Miller house, which one day was a prison today, breathes in calm. And in that calm, in that silence that no longer hurts, I finally find what I always sought: peace of heart. I have learned that blood does not always define family, but loyalty does. For a long time, I believed a father's love could withstand everything, even betrayal. And perhaps it is true, but I also understood that love without respect becomes a chain. And sometimes you have to let children face the weight of their decisions so they understand the value of what they lost. I forgave not for them but for me, because bitterness ages the soul more than years and forgiveness cleans the house of the heart. Today I look at Sarah and give thanks. Thanks for still being here, for reminding me that dignity is never negotiated and that even in the darkness of a basement, truth can be the light that saves you. I wish every family listening to this story finds peace before pride, understanding before distance, and love before resentment. May everyone's home be filled with respect, patience, and second chances. And may God bless those who love without expecting anything in. Let me know in the comments where you have watched it from and if you liked my story. It inspires us to share more such stories with you.